My name is Kristen Anderson, and I grew up about an hour north of Chicago. I grew up without any major trials or tragedies in my life. Fortunately, my parents were always married, and I had everything I needed as a kid, most of what I wanted. And I kind of went through my younger years expecting life would always be that way, just very wonderful and carefree. But it was around the ages of junior high that I started to realize that the world wasn't as great as I thought it was, that my life wasn't as great as I thought it was. I realized that there were wars going on in the world, that there was people who were really homeless, that sexual abuse was a real issue. And I became burdened by all of that. It really worried me, concerned me, and I wanted to do something to make a difference in the world. So I started volunteering at our local homeless shelter every Friday night for about a year. And at the end of that year, I looked around and it looked to me like homelessness was just as much of an issue a year later as it was when I began. And I felt like I hadn't really made much of a difference. I started to think maybe one person couldn't really make much of a difference in the world. And I started to go into high school after that, just trying to focus on making myself, my family, and my friends happy. And the first couple years of high school went fairly smoothly. I had a lot of friends. I was on the soccer team. My boyfriend was prom king. From the outside looking in, and even, from my perspective, life was pretty good. But very quickly and very unexpectedly, things just started to change. And it wasn't all overnight. It was, a process. But I lost four friends in that next year and a half after my sophomore year. And it was for four different reasons. And it was, sort of just one thing after another was happening. But I also lost one of those friends to suicide, which was very difficult for my friends and I. And on top of those friends and my grandmother, who I lost, I was being stalked by two young men, which was very stressful. I didn't have any idea how to handle it, especially as a people pleasing young girl. I just had a really hard time handling that. And then I ended up just spiraling down. I started smoking, drinking, just doing anything um, to numb the pain that I felt on the inside, because I was sort of the friend that everybody went to for help with their problems, but I didn't tell them how I was feeling or what I was going through very much. And I didn't, I wasn't very good at putting words to my feelings at that point in my life. And so I spiraled down even more so once I started smoking, drinking, partying on the weekends. And then I ended up um, the night of New Year's Eve, my senior year, I wanted to go out with my friends. My parents were going to let me go out that night, just to be nice, even though I had been grounded from missing a lot of school. But they were going to let me go out that one night. And I decided while I was out, a little bit even before I left, I wasn't going to come home that night. And eventually I did come home in the morning, and my parents were just beside themselves because they were always very loving, very concerned, involved in my life. They always knew where I was. And I felt terrible because I wasn't really trying to worry them. I was just doing whatever made me feel a little bit better on the inside. That's kind of what I did. I was living in very much in the moment, whatever made me feel a little bit better. And so they didn't know how bad I was doing. They didn't know what had happened to me with my friends, or how, deeply it was affecting me. So they thought I was just being rebellious, and they made my punishment material and social. They told me I'd be grounded until further notice. And then they told me that the things I gotten for Christmas, they were either going to return them or give them to somebody who would appreciate them. And that was hard for me because I was very materialistic, but more than that, I was really living for my friends. So to be grounded until further notice, it was like, what am I going to do now? I was in that kind of a place as a young girl. And so I started sleeping. I went to sleep that day, and I slept the whole day and the whole night because I had been up the whole night before anyway. I was tired enough. And the next morning we woke up and went to church, which is just something we always did in my family growing up. We went to church every Sunday morning. And I remember walking into church and leaving church feeling exactly the same way, very broken, disillusioned, lost, confused, empty. And when we got home, my dad went to get a new washer and dryer, and my mom laid down because she was tired from the night she had stayed up waiting for me. And I decided to put on some videos of my nephews at the time who were very young, just videos of them opening their Christmas presents. And I thought that this would cheer me up, put a smile on my face. And it did for a little bit. But then my best friend called, and my best friend's name was Kelly, and she wanted me to come over to her house to make gingerbread houses before we were supposed to go back to school the next day. It was our last day of Christmas break. And so Kelly and I didn't always make the best decisions together. I told her I was grounded until further notice, but we decided I couldn't get in any worse trouble. So I very dishonestly wrote a note to my parents saying I was going for a walk, and my friend picked me up at the end of the street, and then I went to her house. And I was there for about 3 hours before I was like, I really need to go home. And another friend drove me home, and they dropped me off at the end of the street because they didn't want to get in trouble for taking me. So I started to walk home, and I just felt like I needed to like figure out more of my life. Like I really felt like this was like the day I need to figure out what was really going on with me. And so I went to the pizza restaurant, I got my paycheck, and I just sort of kind of waste time as quick as much as I could. And then I was like thinking again, I really need to go home. So I started to walk home, and it was almost like my legs wouldn't take me there. I was so empty. I really had nothing left. I had just felt like all the fight was out of me um, at that point. And so I went to the park that I grew up playing in. It was across the street from my parents' home, and it was about like kitty corner across the street. And when I went into the park, I just started swinging on the swings the way I did as a child. And as I started to swing on those swings, I just started to contrast these happy, joyful childhood memories that I had as a kid with how it was feeling now as a teenager. So broken, disillusioned, lost, confused, empty. And I felt like no matter what I did, no matter what I tried or hoped or prayed, I felt like I couldn't go back. I couldn't go forward. I felt like I was just going in circles, and like things were never getting better. If anything, they seemed like they were just getting worse. And so I was so discouraged. And sitting there remembering that, all of a sudden I I remembered that in that small town I grew up in, about an hour north of Chicago, just for safety's sake, they don't allow anybody in the park after dark. The police will patrol the park just to make sure nobody's in there, just to keep everybody safe. And I knew if they saw me there, they would make me go home. But I wasn't ready to go home. It wasn't anything about my parents. I just wanted some more time to like figure out my life. It really is what it was. And so I looked around to see where else I could go. And when I looked around, I saw a train that had been parked on the edge of the park. And I knew that I'd driven by several times, and it had been there for about 3 weeks. It hadn't moved at all. So I thought that's somewhere else I could go. It would give me a little more time to think. And it wasn't something that I normally did. I never honestly ventured that close to the train tracks, but I did that day and sat on the train. And um, sitting on the train did something that I didn't expect. It pretty much triggered a thought process that I'd had about 3 months beforehand as I was grieving through my friend Brandon's death. My friend Brandon is the friend that I lost to suicide, and his death was the hardest for me. I just remember thinking I could never do that. I could never take my life, especially the way that he did it. And I just didn't know really how to move, you know, how he could do that, how he could move from being, even just really discouraged and depressed to taking his own life. I thought I could never do that. I could never take my life, especially the way that he did that. I could never do that. But then my thought process started to change, and I started to think things like, um, well, even though I would never do it, if I would ever do it, how would I do it if I would never do it the way that he did it? And I started to think about all these things that I'd heard about or read about or seen on TV, and none of them seemed like they would necessarily work or be good enough until a train went by my parents' house. And as the train went by the house, I could feel the power of the train like shake our home. I could feel the whistle blare through the windows, and it just snapped in my mind. That's one way I could never live through it. And it was a completely hypothetical thought process. It's not something I ever thought I would act on. It wasn't a plan at all. But when I remembered that thought process sitting on the train that day, 3 months later, I started to think about it as maybe an option, as maybe an answer. I didn't think it was the answer. I pretty much knew it wasn't, but I didn't know what the right answer was or what to do anymore. So I was really back and forth in my mind, and I would think things like, there's a reason I'm here. And then I would think there's no reason I'm here. I would think there's something I'm supposed to do here. And then I would think there's nothing I'm supposed to do here. I would think it's going to get better. And then I would think it's not going to get any better. And I was back and forth like that for probably, I think, about an hour and a half until a train started to come. And I hadn't made a decision. I I really didn't know what to do. I really didn't want to die. I just wanted the pain to get a little bit better. And then as the train got closer and closer, I knew I had to make some sort of a decision or go somewhere because it was very cold out. It was January 2nd and it was like 8:30 at night. I could see my breath in the air. I had my gloves on, my winter coat, and I was still cold. So as it got closer and closer, I thought, I don't know when the next train will be. I still don't know what to do. And I made the impulsive decision to get off the train that I was on and walk towards the tracks that the other train was approaching on. And I remember as I stood in between those two sets of tracks, just trying to push down the fear and the shame that I felt on the inside because I knew this wasn't the answer and this wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. I just didn't know what to do anymore. And I decided to close my eyes and clench my fists and lay down on the tracks that the approaching train was coming on. And as I lay down, I clenched my fists tighter and my eyes tighter and turned my head in the opposite direction than where it was coming from because I didn't want to have time to stop. And I pretty much just laid there trying to brace myself for what was about to come. And it was only like a split second before it did start to go over me. And what I felt when it first started to go over me is I felt it begin to pull my hair, my head, and the midsection of my body upward. I felt like I was being like sucked up into the train. And then very quickly afterwards, I felt something just push me down and hold me down into the ground and firmly until eventually the train came to a stop. I just heard like the squealing of the wheels and eventually it stopped. And I had no idea what to think when it came to a stop. I didn't know if I was alive or dead. I really did not know what had just happened. So I looked around to see like what I could see and to try and figure out if I was even alive or if this was just a bad dream. I was just really confused. And as I looked behind me to my right, about 10 feet behind me on my right, I saw my legs. And I knew that they were my legs because they had these bright white tennis shoes on them that I'd just gotten for Christmas. But it felt like that could not be my real life. This could not be really happening. This had to be a nightmare. So I just gathered myself emotionally as best as I could. I remember crawling out from underneath the tracks and looking down at my legs to see, if they were really still there or if they were really gone. And as I looked down to my left leg, I could tell that there was not much of it left there. And so when it was so dark out, I wasn't fully sure. So I turned my attention to my right leg and it looked like it had been severed below the knee, but I'd never seen my leg like that before. I'd never even seen an amputated leg on somebody else before. And so my mind was just working to figure it out. And I ran my hand below where it looked like it had been severed and unintentionally brought my hand up to my face as I ran my hand below my leg. And I saw just something really dark and shiny, and I realized that it must be blood. And that's when I realized that my legs they must be gone. This must not be a bad dream. This must be really happening. And I started crying harder. The pain really hit me at that point. I felt pain when the train was going over me, but it was a much more like dull sort of pain. And now on the side of the tracks, after I realized my legs were really gone, it was much more of a loud, intense pain. And I started crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life, even for my mom, the way that a small child would. But laying there, crying harder than I'd ever cried in my life, definitely the worst pain I'd ever been in my life. All of a sudden, I started to feel like I was like slipping away. I started to feel this tremendous like peace cover me. And I started to hear the song Amazing Grace play over and over in my mind. And I thought, like, maybe that's music from heaven. I don't really know. Like, am I just, imagining this? I wasn't really sure, but I just felt that the words, especially playing over and over in my mind very loudly. And I just started to rest in that peace and um, hoping, sadly, hoping, praying, and waiting to die. And eventually, laying there, as I just was resting in that peace, I felt somebody pull my hair off my face and behind my ear. And I wasn't expecting anybody to find me. I didn't really want anybody to find me. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I just really didn't want anybody there. But as he pulled my hair off my face and behind my ear, I turned around to look at him and he sort of stumbled backward because he wasn't expecting me to be alive. Um, it says in the police report that the conductor said to the engineer, "Did you see that yellow flash?" And the engineer said to the conductor, "Yes, I think we just hit someone." the yellow flash that they had seen was my bright yellow jacket as I laid down on the tracks. And so they had called 911, and there were a number of paramedics and firefighters walking the tracks trying to find me. And this was the first one who found me. It was a firefighter. And so he radioed to the other medical personnel of my location and my status. And they wanted to flight for life me to a hospital about an hour away in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We were just south of the border in Illinois, but they found out it was too foggy and cold out to do so. So they did something that they have never done since, to my knowledge, that wasn't ever done beforehand. And this was that they blocked all the roads and the intersections from where I was to the closest hospital in the area that could take me. And it says in the police report that it was normally a 45-minute drive, but that they got me there in 8 minutes. And when I got there, um, I had no idea really what was all happening. I was still trying to figure it all out myself, but they just were prepping me for surgery, asking me my name, my parents' names, my um, parents' phone number, my sister's name, her phone number. They were trying to get a hold of, my family. And I was able to answer all their questions. I was very much conscious, alive, and talking. And they talked about how they felt like they were witnessing, like in the corner, not even talking to me, just talking to each other, like about how they felt like they were witnessing some sort of a miracle. And it was uncomfortable for me because I didn't really want to be a miracle. I didn't really feel like a miracle. I just didn't, know how to process that. But I found out the reason they said that was because I had lost 8 pints of blood, and scientifically, you're supposed to die after you lose five. But I was fortunately conscious, alive, talking, aware of all my surroundings, all the way up to the point of surgery. I remember as they wheeled me down to the operating room, looking up to the doctor to ask him if he thought I was going to live or die. And he told me that he didn't know. And he told me afterward that he said that because he wanted me to go into surgery that night fighting to die, fighting to live. He just knew I would do better going into surgery with some sort of a will, some sort of a fight in my body. So I was in surgery actually the whole night. They tried to reattach my legs, which was something they weren't successful at doing. And they did, a number of blood transfusions to replace the blood that I had lost. And it wasn't until mid-afternoon the next day when I woke up. And I remember when the first time that I woke up, because as I opened my eyes, I saw my mom. It was my mom, my dad, my brother, my brother-in-law, my sister, all in their room with their arms crossed and their heads looking down at the floor. And as I looked at them, my first thought was, wow, something really bad must have just happened. But I didn't remember the events from the night before right away until my mom's eyes met with mine. And she ran to the side of my bed and she said, "Oh, honey, we're so glad you're okay." And the memories just started to flood back. And I thought, "Mom, they cut my clothes and they cut my coat." And she said, "It's okay. We can get you new ones. We're just glad you're okay." And I remember sort of listening to that and falling back asleep. I know I was very medicated. I was on a lot of, pain medication, but I fell back asleep just remembering that. And the next thing I remember was waking up, and it was my doctor, the doctor who operated on me, just coming to tell me what my injuries were. And I remember he like tapped me on the shoulder and I looked at him, and he told me he wanted to tell me about my injuries, and I just looked away. I looked out the window and started to focus on the trees outside on the window because I just didn't want to. I wasn't ready to deal with it. I didn't know how to handle this being my new reality. I wasn't ready yet. But he very kindly told me that my left leg was severed well above the knee and my right leg was severed directly below the knee, but that I might be able to walk with the use of prosthetic legs one day. And I'm sure he was just trying to give me some hope for the future, but I just wasn't ready. So I didn't even say thank you or goodbye. I just kept staring out the window. And the next thing that I remember was waking up and feeling sort of gross and icky. I'm sure I had like blood, sweat, and tears on me from everything that had happened in the day or so beforehand. But I remember asking my mom if she could call my friend Kelly because I just wanted to get cleaned up and feel a little bit, better. Um, and so she called Kelly. And as soon as my friend Kelly, who had been my best friend since second grade, got on the phone, she asked me how I was doing. And I didn't know what to tell her. I knew I had to tell her something because we'd been friends for so long. So I looked at my legs to see if they were actually gone. And I could tell, even with a sheet covering them, that they were mostly gone. And so I didn't know how to say this any other way. So what I said was, I'm okay, but my legs are cut off. And as I said that, tears just started to stream down my face, because that's the moment that became real to me. That's when I realized my legs were really gone. This wasn't just a bad dream. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was my real life. And she said, "Oh, honey, it's going to be fine. You don't need your legs. You're going to be just fine." And sometimes people think that's so simple or so trite. How could she just say that? But it was really what I needed to hear. I needed to know that the person, one of the people who knew me best, thought I was going to be fine with or without my legs. She thought I would be just fine. And so I was very grateful for her, and even the other friends and family that started to visit and just loved on me like crazy. And one of the things they told me over and over again was, "Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here. Kristen, God kept you here for a reason. There's something you're supposed to do here." And I was comforted by that, but I also struggled with that, because I didn't know why God would keep me here, especially without my legs. I was just like, how does this even fit together? I just could not make sense of it. And but the good thing is that it sent me searching. It really sent me searching for answers. And in the next several months, I eventually got out of the hospital, and I started to like pray, even though I hardly did as a child. I started to look for answers for people who struggle with depression, just find people who knew more about what that feels like and how to handle it. And over time, I put a lot of the pieces together. And the biggest things that I found to help me were building a support system, being honest with myself, pursuing counseling, like getting professional help. I was in counseling for like 3 years. Even my family went to counseling after that, which was very, very helpful for us. And also building a relationship with God and starting to understand how valuable I really was in this world, that my life wasn't replaceable, that I really had a purpose, and that God really had plans for me. All of those things were very, very, very helpful for me. And I started getting asked to share my story as I came out. It was like almost, within a year after I started to come out of this depression. It was about 3 years between my attempt and when I started to find a lot more peace and hope and healing. And uh, right about a year after that is when I got asked to share the story publicly. And it was just with a group of teenagers. And I thought, oh, I don't know if I can do this. But the reason that I did was just because I knew I didn't want anybody else to ever have to go through what I did, um, and lose their legs or something worse before they realized how valuable they were, that their life really mattered, that they really are here for a reason and a purpose. And so I shared my story as openly and vulnerably as I could with the high schoolers that night. And to my amazement, almost all of them came up to me and told me that they struggled with suicidal thoughts or depression, or they knew somebody who did. And I was amazed by that, because most people who struggle with depression, I felt like I was the only one, like nobody really understands how this really feels. And I realized that night that it was so much more common than I had any idea before. And something just started to stir in me to help people like that. It was the very beginning of me starting to want to help them, because I understood them. I knew exactly how they felt. And so not long after that, another door opened for me to share with another group of teenagers, and it was a large group. And I remember thinking, okay, I'll just do this one more time. Maybe it'll help a few more kids, even if it's just one. That'll be worth it. And the response was again just overwhelming. I couldn't believe how much it helped them. And the part that was the most amazing to me, besides how much it helped them, was that in some ways it made sense to me that God did everything he did in my life to help me. But I just couldn't believe that he was using everything he did in my life to help other people. That I just never imagined that could happen like it did. Just by living my life, going through these struggles of finding peace and strength, and learning, more about myself and about the world and everything. People have, been deeply encouraged. And like my book, which I guess I can share, is Life in Spite of Me. People tell me that they read this over and over again. Like they like keep it by their bed and read it over and over again. Like it's become like their life's manual. And I'm just like, I did not plan that. I could not have planned that. Like that is unbelievably incredible to me. But I'm just grateful. I'm so grateful to be alive. I'm so grateful that I found so much peace and hope and just help and encouragement. And I want to encourage other people to keep fighting the battles that they're fighting, keep looking for hope, keep asking for help until you get all of the help that you need. I don't believe that suicide is ever the answer, I don't think it's even an option. I think for me, one of the other things that helped was taking suicide off the table as an option and just looking at what my choices were. That like I couldn't even keep it on the table, just to find freedom from those thoughts. And I am now married. I have a family. I have 6 children actually. And when I look back, I just think about how I didn't think I had a future. I didn't think my life was worth living. I didn't think, it was ever going to get better. But I failed to realize how much of what I was going through wouldn't even matter in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. Most of it not even 2 years past then or 1 year. And that's one of the things I really want young people to take away from my story. So much of what you are struggling with right now is temporary, even if you're not a young person. I really believe that there's a reason that you're here. If you have air in your lungs, there's a reason you're here. There's something that God wants you to do here. You have a purpose. God has a plan for you. And I want you to keep looking for help, keep fighting because you matter. Your life matters.